All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Today, we are going to cover the value of an assessment and the importance of a learning profile for your child, your learner, and the like. Again, we are recording this webinar, so feel free to utilize the recording in the future. We'll share it with you and those who have registered. And we try to answer your questions live. If at any point you want to drop the question in the chat, one of us will try to answer it on the spot. If for some reason we run out of time and we're just so into that robust discussion of ours that we aren't able to reply, we promise you will get the answers that you need and deserve after the recording itself. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, here's our agenda for today. We're going to do our introductions. We have three fantastic panelists, experts with us today, and they'll do their introductions as well. I'll give just a broad stroke overview of Learnfully's mission and services. We'll dive into Learning Disability Awareness Month and kind of the purpose of this webinar, if you will. And then we'll have a panel discussion about evaluations and the like. And then our services and Q&A again, if we have time at the end. So let's do it. Okay, so I'm Jess Corinne. I'm head of educational services. I started my career as a classroom teacher, K-1 split, super excited to dive in and apply everything that I had learned. As you probably imagine, I quickly realized that I was ill-equipped. This was about 20 years ago, and they didn't give us much training in multisensory evidence-based programming in my college, at least. And so I went back to the Bay Area where I was born and raised and joined forces with Linda Mood Bell. I was with them for quite some time as a clinician, a consultant, a center director, a regional director, and really fell in love with multisensory implementation. I feel like at Linda Mood Bell, I was able to refine the art of SET instruction and really, really, really appreciated that opportunity. I then had 3 at the time, now 4 kids, and I really needed to spread my wings and have a little more flexibility. And so I opened my own private practice. I got a bunch of training in other programs such as Orton Gillingham, Wilson Reading System, Step Up to Writing, just to make sure that I was truly differentiating my services and my practice and for those schools and private practitioners who I collaborated with. So I'm so happy to be here at Learnfully. I oversee the fidelity of implementation of our programming and ensure that our assessments and recommendations are matching the needs of each and every one of our learners. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the great Dr. Melissa Sorcy. She is one of my absolute favorite psychologists on this planet, and I'd love for her to give her introduction if you don't mind.
Wow, thank you. I wonder if the great Dr. Melissa Sorcy, if that comes with a cape or a hat.
Yeah, invisible.
That would be awesome. But thank you so much. So I am Dr. Sorcy. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have been specializing in assessment and diagnostics for about 20 years. Prior to that, I was an LMFT where I felt that it took me a very long time to get down to the root of what was going on with my patients, learned about assessment and fell in love and went back to school and got my doctorate so that I could do what I do now, which I'm incredibly passionate about. I am based in the Bay Area. I do not do interventions. It is my absolute 100% job is to roll up my sleeves, figure out what's going on, whether it be learning or clinical or emotional or executive functioning and anything in between, to help to put together good diagnoses and treatment plans for my patients. And that's what I do. And
Love
I'm
it.
happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. We're so excited to hear directly from the source. Okay, Rachel, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Rachel Leonard. I'm an education specialist with Learnfully. I have over 20 years of experience in the field of special education, ranging from full classroom, traditional, virtual instruction, full inclusion, and now administration. And now I'm pleased to just love being a part of Learnfully and working with kiddos. I have a specialist in multisensory instruction and executive function. So glad to be here today.
Yay, we're so happy to have you. And of course, last but definitely not least, Alexis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis. I'm an educational specialist here at Learnfully, and I'm a graduate student at Santa Clara University's School of Education and Counseling Psychology, where I'm studying social justice leadership and higher education, and I'm very excited to be here.
Yay! Yay! So are we. Well, let's dive in. So at Learnfully, we always start with our why. Our why is our mission and our values. Through these values, so growth, possibilities, community, partnership, and connection, we strive to ensure that every child has the ability to learn fully. We recognize that every child learns differently, and we believe that they deserve the access to learn to their fullest potential in and out of the classroom. We are comprised of a highly curated network of educational specialists with a plethora of experience, credentialing, training, and the like. So in programming such as, like we mentioned, Orton Gillingham, Lindsay Mood Bell, Wilson Reading System, Social Thinking, Making Math Real, we ensure that we're meeting our learners' needs. We do start with an assessment or a file review to pinpoint where that breakdown is happening. And then we make differentiated recommendations, initial recommendations that allow the learner to feel successful, see themselves grow, and find that sense of confidence and really how they learn best so they can advocate for themselves through our programming. So we have programming in educational therapy, executive functioning, and beyond. We also pride ourselves on proactive, transparent communication with caregivers and educators alike. We want to ensure that everybody who surrounds the learner as the center of our model has the communication that they need and that consistency, that repetition to meet their learners' needs and ensure that we're expediting progress as best we can as a team. Okay, so what is LD Awareness Month? Learning Disability Awareness Month is October. We're so proud and honored to be able to celebrate with you all through our weekly webinar series and some other fun ways. But here, this is why we're focused on it, because I would say about 60% of the learners at Learnfully have a diagnosis, 40% do not. So they may not warrant a diagnosis. They might not have access to an educational assessment of any kind. And so they are facing challenges, they're facing adversity in the classroom in one or more ways. And we want to ensure that we're spreading awareness and cognizance around the importance of personalization and individualization for these learners. If they have a diagnosis, then they do qualify as that Learning Disability Awareness Month. But we see learners of all needs and kinds. The learning disabilities that fall under the umbrella this month are dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and ADHD. And so each week we're highlighting different topics, different diagnoses to ensure that our audience, our community feels equipped to spread the word beyond our platform. So let's talk about the learner journey. I like to introduce the assessment discussion through what does a learner and, of course, by association, their caregiver experience when a learner is facing those difficulties that we mentioned, when a caregiver and educator first notices those differences. It's really important that, of course, we collect data, and we do that through observations, through informal and formal assessments. Some actually go the comprehensive assessment route, and we'll define that and explore it further for you all. But with that, if they warrant a diagnosis or not, honestly, I'm sure Dr. Sorcy can explain this, but they very well could go into educational therapy, but also counseling and mental health therapy. So depending on what we find throughout the assessment process, we'll then delineate recommendations, as does a psychologist too, based on their findings, and then ensure that we're monitoring progress over time. So we'll have a learner, let's say they receive a diagnosis, they qualify and warrant a diagnosis of dyslexia. One will recommend certain services that are personalized to that learner and in their best interest. That learner will then go through the therapy, the education, the coaching, the mentoring of a trained specialist. And then again, we'll have an opportunity to see their progress firsthand as the team that supports the learner and help them also experience the success and progress. So really build that momentum, build that bravado that they need and deserve to really, truly not just, yes, reach their potential, but it's that aha realization of their potential. That is that breaking point, that pivotal moment that allows them then to put forth the hustle and the growth that they need to succeed beyond. So this just kind of gives you a breakdown on the flow that a learner and their family or / educator may experience. But let's dive into a little more details here so I can flesh that out for you. And again, if you have any questions, I promise I'll try to keep an eye on that Q&A for you. Okay, so let's do it. Melissa, what are the different types of assessments? What can a parent, caregiver, educator expect when it comes to assessments in general?
Well, as you all know, I could talk about this all day and all night. In the work that I do at Teen Therapy Center and Family Therapy Center of Silicon Valley, there are many different child-based assessment tools that I use. But to be honest, for me personally, it kind of all starts with your brain. And that's the cognitive piece that you see right there on the top. Folks sometimes scratch their head and say, well, I'm worried about a learning disability. Why can't we just test math or test reading? Well, processing and how we take information into our brains, make sense of it, and turn it around and have output has a huge stage setting event on then how we are as students. So getting a good cognitive baseline about how the different parts of our brains communicate with each other is extremely important and telling about an individual. Comparing that cognitive output or baseline with your academic achievement, what you're capable of as far as your reading, math, and all that kind of stuff is really, really vital. But when we have kids who have learning challenges, especially those that are undiagnosed, that can lead to lots of behavioral issues. And sometimes behavioral issues are what leads a family to get an assessment. My kid is acting out in class, they're disrupting others. I think they have ADHD. I think they have this. I think they have that. And so using cognitive and achievement testing can really give us the starting points to get to the ideas of what could be causing behavioral issues within peers or within a classroom environment. Executive functioning is also really important. It's a very, very fancy way of saying, how do we get from A to B? It has nothing to do with being a CEO or someone in an actual corporation, but it's, hey, I have a test on Friday. Today is Tuesday. What are the things I might need to do to achieve the result I want on that test? And how do I initiate that? How do I get motivated? How do I plan it, organize it, get going? All those sorts of steps are executive functioning. When we have breakdowns in those areas, which, as Jess sort of said, are not always diagnosable, but are actual real pinpoints for intervention, that can lead us to help a child really change their academic world. So sometimes kids who have those A to B sorts of challenges get misdiagnosed with they're not paying attention or they're not trying, or they might have a learning disability when in fact they really need help with their executive functioning. Now, this is all sort of a domino waterfall effect that can lead to emotional and mental health challenges or issues. So if you're not feeling really positive as a learner for whatever variety of reasons that we've already sort of very, very briefly touched upon, that can lead to stress and anxiety, that can lead to school refusal, it can lead to depression, it can lead to all sorts of emotional issues, withdrawal from peers. So sometimes if we can't identify those and sort of treat them, academic and educational interventions will fall short or kind of bounce off because we're so anxious or so wound or so depressed. So understanding a child's emotional or mental health status will help us drive a treatment process. Developmental challenges. Do we have anything in the mix as far as autism or any other delays or things that might be going on that would be impacting all of the above? And then I threw in there, and this is not common for younger kids, but it really does still come up, but a risk for violence. What have they been exposed to? Do we have siblings who have issues, older siblings? Do we have violence in the home? Anything that might be putting them at risk to either act out violently or to be a victim of violence. And substance abuse. Is there access to substances? What kind of school environment or peer environment are they in that might give them the opportunity to, instead of addressing their issues, maybe numb out a little bit. And unfortunately, I've seen it get younger and younger and younger in many different states of kids that I work with. So, that's a really quick overview of the many different types of child-based assessments.
I mean, clearly it's quite a comprehensive process, and we don't have to go into full depth, but I'm curious, just as a one-off, how long this process could take. If you did a comprehensive full assessment, how long does this usually take for a family? What should they expect?
Well, there's obviously what they should expect in a school system versus what they should expect
Yeah.
privately. So speaking from the private perspective in a clinic, I typically get folks in within about a week or two. So because I always joke, my patients are always leaving. I don't have that ongoing therapeutic relationship, so that we do have an endpoint to what we're doing together. So I work with my kiddos, or my teens, from anywhere from 4 to 6 hours face to face in 2-hour increments. After that, it takes about a week to pull together all the data, create a really nice report that is layperson friendly, that we can go over the nuts and bolts of, and hopefully have parents leaving that meeting knowing that they could stand on the corner and teach it to anyone.
I love that.
Yeah, well, and that's really
The
my
goal.
That's really my goal, is that you don't leave with an expensive stack of paper, you leave with an actionable document. So to answer your question, if we're in a situation where we're really under the gun for some sort of a deadline, we can get all that done in 2 weeks. If we're more lax, like, hey, we just need to get this going, and the kid has lots of stuff on their schedule and sports, and we're going to space things out, it could take 3 or 4 weeks. So, it's really dependent upon the calendars and the planets lining up, but I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay, that's absolutely fair. Thank you. I appreciate that detail. So we mentioned comprehensive. I'm curious if you could just kind of separate the two. What's the difference between a comprehensive assessment and something more supplemental?
Sure. So sometimes folks contact me to fulfill admission requirements. So there's a really strict set of things that a school wants to see. That's obviously not a comprehensive evaluation. And sometimes they want a second opinion where they've had testing done and they're really not clear about a certain area. And maybe I will use different tools to sort of supplement testing to help them gain a better understanding of something that's already been done. Or even more commonly, school districts tend to not be able to diagnose the clinical, but they can diagnose the academic. So folks will come to me saying, hey, we went to our school, we found out these are some learning challenges, but I feel like there's depression or anxiety that we need to flesh out. Can you do that for us? So sometimes we kind of target those very specific questions as opposed to the very broad, we have no idea what's going on, we need to do it all.
Yep. Oh,
does that make sense?
Totally. Absolutely. And for the admissions requirements, you've mentioned to me in the past, those are typically like cognitive and IQ.
Typically cognitive and IQ. As a kiddo is older, College Board has some broader requirements for SAT requirements or accommodations, but for most school admissions, they're looking primarily for cognitive.
That's a great point. I mean, to seek out an assessment, yes, the majority of the time they're in a dire place, but not all the time. And so I think it's really important to separate those two. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. So let's turn it to Rachel and Alexis. What is a learning profile? So we have this comprehensive or supplemental assessment, and Melissa talked about that lengthy report that she makes sure that everybody in the room can give as a dissertation. But then what's the learning profile from an educational specialist perspective?
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. What is the learning profile? So I'm going to go over the steps, like the overall of what it is, and then I'm going to have Alexis talk more to the steps of it.
Okay.
But yeah, a learning profile it's really a unique, individualized instructional plan, right? It identifies our learners' core strengths and their challenges. A learning profile provides recommendations with key strategies on there to support those identified areas of need and our targeted skills. A learning profile, it allows our ed specialists to really dive right into personalized instruction, and it also provides supports and tips for our parents that they can utilize too at home. It looks at the whole child. It looks at social and emotional needs. It looks at our academic needs. It looks at our executive functioning challenges, all those components. And really, it provides information on your individual strengths and your learners' relative needs. And it allows us to give that personalized approach. That's the big focus of the learning profile. So
love it. Thank you. Okay, Alexis. So how would a caregiver, what should they expect the process to entail?
Yeah, so assessments help us capture what the learner already knows and ensure that specialists can introduce new material intentionally and, as Jess said, expedite their process. So at Learnfully, there's about a four-step process to our assessments, starting with the intake. This is where we really identify we work with the parents to identify concerns in literacy, math, or executive function, getting a holistic picture of their learner. Then we work with the parents to schedule a screening process to administer the assessment. Assessments are broken into about 2 one-hour sessions, a few days apart, to give the learner a break. And prior to the assessment, we really work to establish rapport with the learner and ensure that we're in a quiet location to have minimal distractions for an optimal testing environment. Then we conduct the appropriate screeners. We have, lit screener for English, math, neurocognitive testing, executive functioning. Again, so we can just get a holistic picture of the learner so we can give them actionable items and appropriate goals. The last step of the assessment process is to identify learner strengths and challenges and provide recommendations. We have macro goals, which might be keeping them on track for grade level or keeping them getting the grade level above, or it might just be like phonological processing, things like that. We might have smaller goals as well. So we make sure to include both macro and micro goals. We have our specialists put together a report and debrief with the families to discuss next steps. So they're in the loop throughout the whole process and recommending how many sessions per week and our primary goals.
That was great. Yeah. And I think it's really important. Sorry, Rach, really quick, to note that our assessment is not nearly as comprehensive as Dr. Sorcy's. So our primary purpose through our assessment is to pinpoint where that breakdown is happening so we can make recommendations and get them into instruction as quickly as possible. So if a learner comes in with a prior report from someone like Dr. Sorcy, we can utilize that information as data and make recommendations based on that, and then collaborate and consult with the professionals that surround the learner. So eventually we might sprinkle in assessments as a way to progress monitor. And so some of these screenings would take that place. If we chose to hold off on it initially, we would then kind of pepper it into our instructional plan to ensure that we're still gauging progress objectively. That was great. Thank you, Rach. Anything else you wanted to add there?
No, I think that was basically what I was really going to say. It's really matching the child's unique areas of need. It's very targeted. So
yes. Yes. And incorporating interests are really important to us because we know that engagement leads to the highest level of results. And so if a learner is engaged, they see themselves succeed, they know that they are capable through interest, then we can start generalizing and carrying those skills over to areas that are not as interesting to them. So yes, we can identify their interests here as well. Okay, so what resources, this is kind of open, I think, up to all. What resources do you recommend? We can start with Dr. Sorcy for parents.
So in my recommendations, I try to hit the main environments of home and school and peers. Mm-hmm. And that could be anything from also therapy if that's on board or necessary. But that can involve anything from, hey, here is some data from the time that we spent together that needs to be looked at more closely. And that can be websites. That can be, I even recommend movies to some of my families to watch and discuss, websites, books, all sorts of kinds of things, and especially other professionals. Since I am the one-stop person who identifies the issues, creates a treatment plan, I need to be able to hook people up with what to do next and who that may be or what places that might be found in. That's what I provide.
I love that. And I don't know if you use this, but I think it's the brain building book, something along that line. I think it's Liz Angoff, but essentially they talk about the brain to the child, the learner, and how their brain is comprised. And I think it's so helpful. So we can always drop that resource if you agree, because I think that's helpful for learners, especially to really learn how they learn best and learn that every brain is different and how they can function to their best potential. So
absolutely.
That's great. Thank you. Rach and Alexis, do you have any other resources that you want to mention? We'll also send these resources in the follow-up email. So don't feel like you guys have to take a ton of notes. We'll make sure we add that to the email.
Awesome. Yeah, there were a couple that I was really kind of focusing on and that I'm constantly referencing for my families that I work with. Mm-hmm. One of them is Edutopia. I love this because they have a wide variety of topics, anywhere from assessment, social emotional learning, brain-based learning and interest-based learning. So a lot of those different articles and blogs on those things are really awesome. They have some really cool videos too, getting learners to focus on learning and then getting your teen to open up. So some of the things that are just really relevant to a lot of my families. And then one thing that I just recently discovered that's been amazing is on YouTube, there's a Mineola Grows series, and a lot of it is on just how our brain works and then self-regulation and the importance of that mindset. Yeah, some really, really cool resources on there. So
nice. Thanks for sharing that. Alexis, any that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to highlight Learnfully's amazing resources, like our parent coaching and webinars and blog posts that we have. They're accessible. You can reference them anytime. I highly recommend understood.org as well. They have great resources and articles that you can reference throughout.
No, fantastic. It's true. We do have quite a dynamic library of blogs and webinars on YouTube, so feel free to check that out. Okay, so in close, we're gonna open it up in a moment, but from our three experts, starting with Dr. Sorcy, I know there's a ton of advice you could give. I know this is very brief, concise presentation, but what is, just if you had to pick one piece of advice that you would leave caregivers with, I know, about assessments?
The one piece of advice that I would give, and that is a really hard question.
I know.
Is to understand that, at least from the task that I'm presented with, an assessment is a snapshot of a student in a moment. You are not defining their entire life. You're not defining their entire personality, and you need to act upon the data as appropriate. But that this is not any sort of sentence that they're going to be this way forever, or that this is doom and gloom. Assessments really need to be looked at positively as, you're doing this, you're getting information, and you're having actionable items. So I really encourage folks to look at this as a portrait of a day or a span of time.
Absolutely agree. I don't think I could have ever said it any better than that. That was great. It's just a snapshot. I mean, not just, I shouldn't use that word. It is a snapshot though. Right. And so it's important to keep that in mind, and they can evolve. They can evolve over time. And so you could get different results in, 6 months if, on a different day. So anyway, I appreciate you saying that, and taking perspective is key. Okay, Rach.
I think mine was kind of actually along the same lines. I really think that with the learning profile specifically is that, taking that snapshot, but we also adjust throughout and with frequent progress monitoring, and really, as we're working with a learner, we are adjusting constantly to whatever their interests are, whatever their needs are. And that constant communication is really key. Like, please share, talk, discuss with us. We are here to support you and your kiddo. So.
Yeah, that communication reciprocity is really, really important to us, because we want to make sure we're seeing what you see and you see what we see. And again, we all know the most successful programming is consistent and repetitious. And so if we're not all working on the same page, it can be really challenging for the learner to find their groove and feel successful. So I totally agree. It's the first step in the process, but it's a whole process that involves a lot of communication. All right, Alexis.
Just to kind of summarize as well, I think it's important to communicate and have conversations with your child early and frame assessments as helpful tools, not punishments. I feel like a lot of students go in with that mindset, like, I'm being punished for this, I'm being penalized, and really emphasizing that getting the assessment is going to help them. So we can give them actionable items as well, and also promote a growth mindset and celebrate their flexible thinking and how they think about problems. So having those conversations early on before the assessment, I think, can really relieve a lot of stress for them, and they can go into it with a more open mind.
That's a great point. Assessment. Yeah, because that executive function that Dr. Sorcy discussed earlier on is that prefrontal cortex. And when you have anxiety and stress, it blocks the information from communicating in the different component parts of your brain. So if you're stressed and you go into something anxious, my son does this all the time. He has tests almost every day at his school, and he goes in and he just completely blanks out. It's not that he doesn't know it, but he blanks out. And so you want to get the most accurate appraisal of their skill set. And I think having honest, open conversations all throughout the process is really valid. And so that book I mentioned could be a great tool, great vehicle for that conversation if you're not sure where to start as a caregiver and educator. I think it's really, really important, especially at I don't know, Dr. Sorcy, if you agree, but like, I would say you can start as early as first, second grade, talking about how brains are built differently. And we're just here to support you and figure out how you learn best, right? I think that's so,
I think
so
that
important.
my poor children heard about their brains in utero, but I agree with you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think this brain building book is geared towards middle elementary, but I could be wrong. So we'll send that to you guys. Well, thank you. Thank you, expert panelists. Learnfully is here to support you. I know you've heard it all along the way, but just to give you a kind of brief overview on what we do, again, we start with the caregiver lens. So we have a questionnaire for caregivers and educators alike to ensure that we take perspective of what you're seeing. And then we go through either a Spark learning assessment. We recommend that you go through a neuropsych assessment through Dr. Sorcy. We have some kind of tool, a vehicle, right, that we use for recommendations and get into the support solutions as quickly as possible, which is where we come into the consultation and learning plan that we have discussed. So we don't need to go into too far depth here. Our services there's a diverse offering here. We start with educational therapy. If a learner is facing a disparity between their skill set, their potential, and their performance, there's a gap there we want to bridge through multisensory evidence-based instruction. If a learner is usually executive function coaching goes hand in hand with that, to be completely honest, but sometimes learners need strictly just EF coaching. And so we offer that in a one-to-one format, but we also offer what we call executive functioning boot camps. So they're more of a small group online, but also in person at the schools where we partner, an opportunity for them to learn socially, but also to have that feeling of inclusivity. Because they're in a classroom, they have felt that they've struggled, they feel like nobody understands, and they're in a classroom of other learners who are experiencing similar challenges. And so it helps them feel supported. We also, within that boot camp, not only have the class, we also have one-offs. So we have personal check-ins with the caregiver and or the learner to ensure that we're helping them generalize their skill sets. Academic tutoring and study skills, test preparation, those are more of an application phase of instruction. If you think about the brain and how we want to make sure we strengthen it as a framework for learners to stand upon, those first two are really bottom line. Those are the foundational principles. Then as you're getting more and more bravado, but also strength and skill set, you can move into those more general carryover programs, such as tutoring specifically for homework application and study skills and test preparation strategies that do incorporate some executive functioning as well. And then we're really flexible. We get it. Most of us are parents, and we know that it's really tricky to find time to prioritize this. And so we're all about being flexible, making sure that we have opportunities for parents and their learners to visit us online or in person, one-on-one, again, small group. We can even coach the parent to do it themselves if they feel like there's a good dynamic at home. Not always the case, but if they feel like that they at least want to try it out, then we can do parent-led, but also asynchronous instruction where we just create a lesson plan and coach the parent on how to implement it, and then still have that progress monitoring built in to ensure that the learner's needs are being met. So how can you get involved? We talked about resources, and some of those overlap here. I was on the board for the International Dyslexia Association for quite some time. It's an amazing organization. They have branches that are regional. And so look into your specific region, your specific city, to see if you're interested in getting involved there. Children and Adults with ADHD is CHAD. So you can look up that nonprofit too. LDAA is a good one. As Lexis mentioned, understood.org, Learnfully. And then ADDA, which also involves some adults too, not just children. So I think we're in this turning point where a lot of us feel that the 1 in 5, the 20% of learners who have a diagnosed learning difference or disability, that number is quite higher than 20%. And so we're really trying to make sure that everybody who faces a challenge understands the why behind it and has the support that they need. And so through these resources, through getting involved, through spreading the word and cognizance, we want to support our community as best we can, and really making sure that all learners get what they need to learn fully. So that's about it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been an amazing discussion. I'm so excited to connect afterwards. So if you want to email us, call us, text us, follow us on socials, feel free to share this webinar. We posted, not only we share the recording, but we posted on YouTube. I am so grateful for our expert panelists and their time. Their insight is so important to us. So thank you three for being here. And we look forward to hearing from our community as well. Thanks, everybody. Happy LDA month.